The letter M in the MERN stack traditionally stands for MongoDB, and our MERN stack project needs a MongoDB database and data models. Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we're adding MongoDB to our MERN stack project. I'll provide links to example source code and all resources in the description below. MongoDB is a NoSQL database built with collections of documents. My Node.js course gives a deeper explanation of MongoDB, and I highly recommend that course as a prerequisite before you complete this tutorial. Our starter code today is available in the course resources. It's the completed code from Lesson 2 as we now begin Lesson 3 in this MERN stack project series. We will be integrating MongoDB into our REST API today, but before we do that, there's a dependency that I want to set up in our existing code. You can see I've got the package.json file open here. I'm going to change the name to Lesson 3 and go ahead and save that, but afterwards I'll press Control and the backtick, and I'll pull this down a little bit so we can still see the dependency list, or at least some of it there. I'll scroll that up. There we go. And I'm going to type npm i.env and hit enter. This is going to install the .env package. It doesn't take long, and now you can see it listed in the dependencies. This will let us use environment variables inside of our REST API. Now, environment variables are values that we want to use on the server when we deploy as well, but we will not want those stored in GitHub, so we'll set all of that up. Let's first start by going to server.js, and I like to put this right at the top, the very first line, and I'm going to put require.env, and then after that I need to put .config, and that allows us to use .env throughout our package. We won't need it in every file. We'll just put that right here, and we'll still be able to use environment variables in all of the files where we need them. Okay, after doing that, let's create a .env file. Now, it needs to be at the same level as the server.js here, so I'm just going to create that file, and it starts with a period instead of the word dot, and then it's env. Now you can see I'm using VS Code icons extension, and then it gets this little gear symbol here. And now we can put variables inside of here that we'll be able to pull out as environment variables. So just as an example of this, I'm going to type node_env and set this equal to development. Note, I don't need any quotes around development or anything else. This is just how you set them. You typically set these as all caps for these environment variables as well. So I'll save this, and now back in the server.js, somewhere here, and I'll just put it right towards the top, I'm going to say console.log, and now to pull a value out of the environment variables, I'll say process.env, and then we put the actual name of the variable. So I'm going to log that value to the console when we start up our server. So let's go ahead and start up the server. I'll do control backtick, then npm, I want lowercase here, npm run dev, and I'll pull this up, and let's see what we get inside of our console. And I had to scroll to see it there. So the development was printed before we got the server running on port 3500, but there is our environment variable printed to the console, just like we expected it to be with the console log statement. So now to keep this value or any values we store inside of the .env out of GitHub, we want to make sure to list that .env file right here inside of the gitignore file as well. Okay, now as we set up our free mongodb.com account, we're going to get a database URI string back that will let us connect to MongoDB, and we'll want to store that in this .env file. So I'm going to put database_URI equals, and this is where we'll put the connection string that we get from MongoDB. So the next chapter of this video is about 5.5 minutes. I've got timestamps in the description, and it's going to walk you through setting up a MongoDB database at mongodb.com. Now this clip is taken directly from my Node.js course because the process for setting this up hasn't changed at all. So just as you go through, realize this about this MERN stack project that we're creating. creating. You can name your project whatever you want, but please name your database TechNotesDB, and I'll type this out just so you can see it. So remember to name your database as you set this up as TechNotesDB with a lowercase t at the beginning, at least if you want it to match my code. So you'll have that, and then create your first collection and call it users, all lowercase. Now I'm going to go ahead and share that clip so you can go ahead and create your MongoDB account. If you already have that, if you already know how to do it, just skip this chapter in the video and we'll come back and we'll put our database URI right here inside of the .env file. Okay, we're at mongodb.com and I already have an account, so I'm going to choose sign in. If you don't have an account, you'll want to sign up for a free account, so you can just click try free. I'm going to click sign in, and then it will take me to a page that probably uses my Google ID or allows me to log in with an email address. Yes, there it is. So you get those options. I'm going to log in with my Google email address or my Google account, and then we'll meet back up after you have your account or you've signed into your account. Okay, I'm signed into my account and I'm on the projects page where I can create a new project. And you see I already have one project here. Now, if you're not on this page once you're signed in, just click the little leaf in the top left and it says view the organization home, because that's where this is. So once you're there, you'll want to create a new project. And now you'll want to name the project. I'm just going to name this one Mongo Tuts, short for tutorial, and click next. And then it asks you to go ahead and set permissions or members, and it'll probably assign that to your default account to start out with. As you can see, I have project owner right here. So I'm going to click create project. With the project created, you can see I now have Mongo Tuts up here above database deployments. We need to build a database, and of course it gives you the big shiny button right in the middle to do so. So please click that, and then it gives you choices. And we're just going to go with free today. If you want to get one that you pay for, that's fine. I'm going to choose free over here on the right. And then it will say create a shared cluster. And right now, I'm just going to keep all the defaults. So free, shared, it has AWS, it has one of the USA regions for me because I'm in the US. You may want to pick a different one if you're not, and maybe it already defaults to something close to you. And then it just has these other default settings. And I'm going to go with all of that, even the default name here, cluster 0, and click create cluster at the bottom. Now it says new clusters take between 1 to 3 minutes to provision. So I'll come back when this is finished. My cluster 0 has now been created and we're given this screen. So what we want to do is click browse collections. We don't have any collections yet, so we get this, and it says load a sample data set or add my own data. We're going to choose add my own data. With that, it asks for a database name and a collection name. So let's just call this company DB. And then we can call the collection name, let's go with employees. And I'll just keep that all lowercase. Company DB is capital company and capital DB at the end. And I'll click create. And with that, Mongo has created our company DB database and our empty employees collection right here. What we should do now is concern ourselves with database access. So let's create a user that can access this new collection and database that we have. So create a database user. We click the big button that says add new database user, and then it gives us password, certificate, and all of that. We'll just stick with password, and it put in some old information for me. Let's put in something different here. Let me go with Mongo Tut once again. And then for a password, I'm just going to, and we'll go ahead and show whatever the password is. I'll go with testing 1 2 3, kind of like a mic check. Okay, so we've got Mongo Tut testing 1 2 3. I think we'll keep all of the default options here, and we want the read and write to any database. And of course, I'll come back later and delete this user, but for now, we'll use it for the tutorial, and we'll click add user. And once we have the user, we need to go back to our cluster. So let's click Mongo Tuts, and that takes us back to our cluster. And it says we are deploying your changes, current action configuring MongoDB. So I'll give this just a second, and then we're going to click connect. With the configuration now complete, let's go ahead and click the connect button. It tells us we need to set up some security. This part is required, and what we're going to do is allow access from anywhere. We don't really know where we're going to host our backend yet, so this is good for development right now until we actually know what IP address we had. So let's just add in the zeros, and that means it's good from anywhere. We already created a user, so now let's click choose a connection method, and we're going to connect our application. This gives us a connection string, and this is what we want. Notice it's already put in the MongoTut user I created. Now I'm going to have to put in the password, including getting rid of the less than and greater than around the password. And then also I need to replace my first database with the company DB, which was the name we gave the database. So I'm going to copy this, and we're ready to close out of this now and open up Visual Studio Code. Okay, you should now have your connection string from MongoDB. I'm going to paste mine in here, except I'll show you a difference. I'm going to press Alt-Z to get this code to wrap. You should have your username right here, and then you should have your password right here. Of course, I'm not going to show you mine, but here just in a second as we go away from the screen, I'll put mine in so mine continues to work as well as we connect to MongoDB. Notice I also have the TechNotes database name right here inside of the string as well. So you can just match that pattern up to yours to make sure you have a proper connection string from MongoDB. We're back at the package JSON, and we're almost ready to create our data models. But before we do that, we need to go ahead and import in one other package, and that package is called Mongoose. It's a library that really helps us communicate more easily with MongoDB. So I'm typing npm I Mongoose and installing that as a dependency as well. It won't take long either. I can close out of the terminal, and we'll now see Mongoose listed here amongst the dependencies as well. So now in the file tree, I want to create a new folder, and we'll call this folder models. This will store our data models. And now inside of the models directory, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this I said new folder, a new file, and I'm going to call this user.js with a capital U. And this will be our user data model. The first thing I need to do is require Mongoose. So I'll say const mongoose equals require Mongoose. After that, we'll start creating a schema that will allow us to have a data model. And so we'll say const user schema, and we'll set this equal to a new mongoose.schema. And now that schema has a capital S when you put it after Mongoose and the dot. Okay, inside of our user schema is where we'll have our data model. So we need to think about the different types of data that a user needs to store. Let's go back to our user stories quickly, and we can look at some of these points in here to see or get an idea of what data our user needs. Now, of course, we need a username and a password, but let's talk about the rest. Let's look at number 13, for example. It says users can be employees, managers, or admins. So we also need user roles. And then let's look at number 9, and it says provide a way to remove employee access as soon as possible if needed. And really we should switch this to user access. And then underneath that, number 10 says notes are assigned to specific employees. That's true, but employee refers to a role really. So let's also say to specific users. Now, this won't impact our data model for user, but it will for notes. But we just got the terminology defined a little bit better by switching employees to users there. So what we do know is we need roles, as we see here in number 13, and also for number 9, provide a way to remove user access ASAP if needed. Let's give an active status, and that means users might be assigned to different notes, and we wouldn't want to delete a user if they still had notes assigned to them. So what we can do is disable a user by having an active status, basically Boolean data if they're active, true, and if not, false. And that would allow the admin or manager to remove user access ASAP if needed. Okay, with those changes made to the user story, and we've gone over that a little, now we're ready to define our model. So we'll say username, that's the first thing we need. And then this is an object as well. And here we'll say type, and this will be string type data. And then we can say it is required, and we set that to true. Now after that, let's put a comma, and then I'm just going to highlight this and do Shift Alt and the down arrow, and I'm going to switch this to password, and it's also string and also true. Now let's do that once again, Shift Alt and the down arrow, and we can put roles. But now we'll make another change here. Let's wrap this object that we have in an array. So we'll put our opening bracket and our closing bracket, and now we're saying roles is an array, and the data within the array will be string. But instead of required, let's put a default value, and we'll have the default be employee. So even if a role is not assigned in our front-end application as the request is sent to create a user, it will assign the default role of employee. Now, as an array, this indicates that a user might have more than one role, and more than one value could be stored, of course, in the array. Now we could copy this down one more time. So let's do this again with Shift Alt and the down arrow. And here we'll have an active status. Let's go ahead and remove the array from around this. We can remove that final comma because this would be our last one. Now the type here will be Boolean, and then we'll have a default to true. As we would create a new employee, they should immediately be active without us even needing to send that data to the API. This will just allow any new employee, or I should say any new user created, will automatically be active. Now before we finish with this file, we need to come underneath the definition of our schema and just say module.exports, set this equal to mongoose.model, and then we name it user, and then we pass in the user schema that we just created. And now we should be finished with our user model. And now we need to create a note model. I am going to just Control A to select everything in this file and Control C to copy, and then create a Note.js with a capital N, and I'm going to paste everything in from the user model and just make some changes. But before we make those changes, I guess I could make the first one just so we know we're working with the note model. We'll change this user schema, and I'll press Control D to select the second instance of that. And then I'll move to the front, arrow over 4, and change this to a note schema. Other than that, let's see if we need to change anything else quickly. Just the name here of the model we can change to note. And now, as we come in and make changes to these different types of data, we once again want to refer to the user stories. Let's look at 10, 11, and 12. So notes are assigned to specific users. So we know in this note model, we need a reference back to the users. And then notes have a ticket number, title, a note body, you could say the text of the note, and then created and updated dates. And then notes are either open or completed. So this is another status here. We could basically say it's completed or not. And if not, it would be open. So those are things to consider as we look at what data we want to store in the note. So let's start out with a user, because we know it needs to refer back to the users that we have. Now this data type is going to be just a little different than string or number or any normal type of data that you would think of. This is related to Mongoose. So we'll say mongoose.schema. So we're referring to the other schema we've created. Then we say types, then we say object ID. Well, we're not specifically referring to that other schema here, but we're saying what type of data this is. It's an object ID from a schema. Then required is true, but one more comma after that, and now we have a ref here. Now this is where we're referring exactly to which schema, so this is referring back to that user schema that we created. After that, let's change password to title. This would be type of string and true. After that, we could change this one, let's call it text, because it is the text of the note. and this would be string, and let's put required true again for that. But we also need to remember to remove the array that is wrapped around this one, as this was roles in the one we copied from. Okay, after we get text, oh, I've got an extra quote there. Okay, after the text, now we have the completed, and this is a Boolean again, but the default will be false, because when we create any new note, it will be open and not completed. So we needed the opposite right there. Now those are our basic data types, but notice it's not all of the data types we needed. We also said we needed dates, both created at and updated at, and we need a ticket number. So there's some other things we're going to do for those types of data. I'm going to move the curly brace off this top line, likewise off this bottom line, because for the timestamps we need to add, that is an option. So I'll put that on a separate line, and then inside of here we can just say timestamps and set that to true. And MongoDB will actually give us both created at and updated at timestamps just by setting this option. And when I save, you'll see it gets formatted just a little differently, but this is easier for me to read, to know that this is one object and then this option here is another object. So now we have everything except our ticket number that we need for the note. And really, there will be an automatic object ID created with every record, and that's what we're referencing here for the user. And the note will have one too, but as you may see this as we work through, the MongoDB object IDs are very long strings, and it wouldn't be too practical to use that for a ticket number. And in fact, what our owner Dan D wants is a sequential ticket number. Now, he doesn't want it to start at 0 because that makes it seem like his shop just opened up. So he said start it at 500 or higher, and that's what we'll do. But then every note created will be in a sequence of ticket numbers. We can do that once again by installing a package that will help us. So let's go back to package.json so we can see it installed, and control and backtick, and then let's say npm I mongoose-sequence. And this will install, and then it will help us issue those ticket numbers in a sequence. Okay, we know we have the dependency now. So now let's go back to the Node.js model, and at the top of the file, we're going to define auto increment, and we're going to set this equal to require mongoose-sequence, and then after that we need to follow it with another set of parentheses and pass mongoose in. I know that looks different than some requires you may have seen, but that is what is documented for this package. Okay, now we'll scroll down to where we have created our schema here already. So right after the schema, we need to say note schema dot plugin, and then we pass in auto increment, put a comma, curly brace, and we set some options for this. So now we tell it what the increment field is going to be named, and we're going to name it ticket. This will create a ticket field inside of our note schema, and that will get the sequential number. This also gets an ID called ticket nums. We won't see this inside of our notes collection. What will happen is a separate collection named counter will be created, and we'll see that ID inside of the counter collection. And then we need to tell it what number to start the tickets at. So we'll say start sequence, which is just SEQ for this option, and we'll tell it to start at 500. Now that's all we need to do. And once we start creating notes, this plugin for auto increment that we're using from Mongoose sequence will create a separate collection called counter, where it tracks this sequential number and continues to insert it into our notes. We have now created our models, and we have our connection string inside the .env file, so we are now ready to create our connection to MongoDB. Let's go to the file tree and the config folder, and let's create a new file in the config folder, and I'm going to call this db and then a capital C ONN, so database connection.js. We'll start here by requiring Mongoose once again, so we'll say const mongoose require mongoose, After we do that, we'll just define a function called connectDB. This will be an async function. And inside this async function, we'll have a try catch. Inside the try, we'll await mongoose.connect. And then we just pass in that environment variable. So process env.database_URI. And then we'll have our catch. And here we'll just catch the error. And then we'll console.log the error. That just should be ERR. There we go. After that, we can do the module.exports, set this equal to connectDB. Now we're ready to go back to the server.js, and we'll start here at the top with a few more imports. We need to import connectDB that we just created. So this will equal require, and then we'll be looking at the config folder, and then we should be able to look at dbcon. There it is. We'll also need to require Mongoose here, so we'll say const mongoose equals require and get Mongoose. There it is. And then after that, I want to go ahead and bring in that log events function that we have inside of our logger file. So this will equal require, and then it's inside of our middleware folder, and then it's inside of logger. So now we have our 3 imports. We're ready to apply these to our server.js. We don't have to scroll far. Let's just go right under this console log where we logged the node env value, and let's call this connect database function. And then we can scroll all the way to the bottom where we're listening for the port and saying the server is running on port and providing the number. We're going to wrap this in a listener for the Mongoose connection. So here we can say mongoose.connection.once, and we'll listen for the open event. And then this has a callback function. And we'll put our app.listen right inside of here, and then we can put another statement as well. So first I'll paste this one in, but also let's go ahead and console.log connected to MongoDB. Now I'm going to scroll for just a little more room, and we can put one other listener here. So this will be mongoose.connection.on instead of once. And we'll listen for an error. So if there's an error with our connection, then we'll pass the error into this callback, and then we could console.log whatever the error is. But let's also use our log events, and I'm going to paste this in once again just so I don't have typos. It's a template literal, and it just always creates some typos as I try to type them out, so I'll spare you that. But what we can get from this is the error number, the error code, the error system call, and the error host name. All of that should be provided through a MongoDB error. And then we can create a new file called mongoerrorlog.log. And I'll save the file here. Now, one way you could test this is to go ahead and stop your internet connection and then start this server. Remember, you would type npm run dev, and you should get an error here. I believe it doesn't provide an error number, so it'll only do that if it's available. It might say undefined there, but I have tested that out, and you get everything else written in your error log, and the log will appear in your logs folder as expected. Now, we're going to test out all of our user models we created and everything about our MongoDB connection as soon as we create controllers to process the rest of the CRUD events, the requests we'll get, the create, read, update, and delete. So that is coming up next. For now, let's just open up a terminal once again, type npm run dev, and we'll make sure our MongoDB connection is working as expected. Starting the node server, we've got development from our environment variables. It says connected to MongoDB, and the server is still running on port 3500. Everything is good to go. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.